No one noticed the quiet way. Aaliyah Carter folded her hands in her lap as she sat in the cold, glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline, because all eyes were on Margaret Whitmore, the woman who controlled the room without ever raising her voice. Margaret was power-dressed in pearl earrings and tailored grey silk, the kind of woman whose presence made lawyers sit straighter and assistants stop breathing. And today she was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that carried a warning. Aaliyah, a black woman raised in modest circumstances, had learned long ago that smiles like that often came before humiliation. The documents lay on the table between them, thick and heavy, printed on expensive paper, waiting like a sentence already decided. The word prenuptial agreement was bold at the top, as if shouting what everyone else in the room already believed, that Aaliyah was a risk that needed to be controlled. Across from her sat Ethan Whitmore, the man she loved, the man who said he didn't care about money, class, or his mother's disapproval. But love had a way of shrinking when confronted with power. Ethan's fingers twitched, his jaw tight, his eyes unable to meet Aaliyah's as his mother leaned forward and spoke with practiced calm, explaining how this document was just a formality, how it would protect the family, how it was standard procedure for people like us. The words people, like us, hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Aaliyah understood exactly what they meant. She wasn't one of them. Not to Margaret, not to the Whitmore name that carried old money, country clubs, private jets, and boardroom legacies. Margaret's gaze finally settled on Aaliyah, cool and assessing, as if she were an item up for appraisal. She spoke softly, yet every syllable cut deep. This prenup ensured that in the event of divorce, Aaliyah would leave with nothing beyond what she brought into the marriage, which, according to Margaret, was sentiment and ambition. No claim to property, no claim to future wealth, no claim to the Whitmore legacy. Aaliyah felt the heat rise in her chest, not anger yet, but something more painful, disappointment. She had walked into that room hoping for acceptance, or at least tolerance. Instead, she was being measured, reduced, and dismissed. Her life had not been easy. She had worked 2 jobs through college, supported her mother after her father disappeared without explanation when she was young, and built her dignity brick by brick in a world that rarely offered black women the benefit of the doubt. She wasn't marrying Ethan for money. She was marrying him because he made her laugh, because he held her when her anxiety spiraled, because he promised to choose her even when it was hard.
Lawyers watched. Ethan swallowed. And in that moment, this is where you, watching this story, should pause and ask yourself, how many times have people been judged before being known? How many dreams have been nearly buried by prejudice dressed up as tradition? If stories like this matter to you, if you believe truth always finds its way to the surface, then this is your moment to subscribe. Because what unfolds next will challenge everything you think you know about power, pride, and hidden identities. Aaliyah looked at the document again, every clause screaming distrust. She felt small but not weak. She had learned survival early. Slowly, she reached for the pen. Ethan's head snapped up. "You don't have to," he started. But Margaret interrupted him with a raised finger. "She does," she said calmly, "if she wants to be part of this family." That sentence burned. Aaliyah's fingers tightened around the pen. She signed. The sound of ink on paper was final, echoing in her chest louder than any argument. Margaret nodded, satisfied, already dismissing Aaliyah as a problem solved. What no one in that room knew, what no one could have imagined, was that this prenup, meant to strip Aaliyah of protection, would soon become the very thing that exposed a secret, powerful enough to shake the Whitmore empire to its core. Because far away, in a private suite overlooking the Atlantic, a man watched the same city skyline on a muted television screen. His name was Isaiah Carter, and the world believed he had vanished decades ago. Margaret didn't realize was that her family's wealth was entangled in systems Isaiah had helped design and could just as easily dismantle. Meanwhile, Aaliyah tried to convince herself the signing meant nothing. She told herself love was bigger than paper, that respect could grow with time. But the way Margaret treated her shifted subtly after that day. Cold politeness, replacing forced civility, constant reminders of how things were done in their world. Family dinners became silent tests. Conversation stopped when she entered the room, and Ethan, though still loving, began to seem tired, stretched between loyalty and comfort, choosing peace over confrontation more often than Aaliyah wanted to admit. Still, she held on, unaware that unseen forces were already moving around her, aligning with surgical precision. Because Isaiah Carter had made a decision. The prenup would stand for now. He didn't intend to fight it directly. He intended to let the Whitmores believe they had won. And if you're watching this story unfold, this is where it gets dangerous, in the quiet before power reveals itself. If you want to witness what happens when arrogance meets truth, when prejudice collides with legacy, make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter will pull back the curtain on a plan so calculated, it will change every life, connected to that signature forever. The engagement party was meant to be a celebration, but for Aaliyah it felt like a performance, where she had been cast as a supporting character in someone else's legacy. The Whitmore estate glowed under chandeliers older than most countries, laughter echoing off marble floors while servers floated like shadows with silver trays of champagne. Every guest wore wealth effortlessly, speaking in the coded language of people who had never worried about rent or rejection. Aaliyah stood beside Ethan, her hand resting lightly on his arm, smiling when spoken to, nodding politely, absorbing the subtle glances that assessed her dress, her posture, her very presence. She heard the whispers, soft but sharp, about how lucky she was, how Ethan had such a big heart, how love was admirable, but reality was different. Margaret moved through the room like a queen inspecting her court, greeting donors, politicians, and CEOs, occasionally stopping just long enough to remind Aaliyah of her place with a measured smile. At one point, she introduced Aaliyah to a woman from the board of a private equity firm and said, "This is Ethan's fiancée. She comes from a very humble background," emphasizing the word as though it were a character flaw. Aaliyah's chest tightened, but she responded with grace, the kind learned through years of swallowing insult and choosing dignity. What Margaret didn't notice was the man standing near the back of the room, blending into the crowd with deliberate ease. He was dressed simply, no flashy watch, no visible symbols of status, yet several of the most powerful men in attendance subtly shifted when he passed. His name on the guest list was listed under an alias, but his influence was real, immediate and quietly terrifying. Isaiah Carter had arrived, not to reveal himself yet, but to observe. He watched his daughter from across the room, pride and pain colliding in his chest. She carried herself with strength, but he saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile faded the moment she thought no one was looking. He saw Margaret's control, the way people deferred to her, and he recognized it instantly. The confidence of someone who believed their power was permanent. Isaiah listened carefully, absorbing conversations, confirming what he already suspected. The Whitmore empire was impressive on the surface, but beneath it lay fragile alliances, questionable investments, and a dangerous reliance on systems Isaiah had once helped engineer. He didn't need to confront them. He didn't need to threaten. All he had to do was apply pressure in the right places and let gravity do the rest. As the evening progressed, Margaret raised her glass to make a toast. She spoke about legacy, about preserving family values, about the importance of protecting what generations have built. Her eyes briefly met Aaliyah's as she said it, and the message was clear. You are allowed here, but you do not belong. Applause filled the room. Isaiah didn't clap. He turned. Isaiah Carter had learned long ago that invisibility was sometimes the strongest form of protection. To the world he was a ghost, a man who had walked out of a modest life, leaving behind a wife, a daughter, and unanswered questions. But the truth was far more complicated, layered with sacrifice, danger, and a secret so massive that even speaking it aloud once could have cost him everything. From the glass-wrapped penthouse overlooking the Atlantic, Isaiah watched the news cycle scroll silently across the screen, his sharp eyes catching a familiar name, Whitmore, paired with a photo of his daughter standing beside Ethan, her smile careful, guarded. His chest tightened. Aaliyah had grown into a woman of quiet strength, the kind that came not from privilege but from endurance. He had watched her from a distance for years, through trusted intermediaries and discreet updates, ensuring she never lacked opportunity, even when money was tight and life seemed unfair. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Isaiah Carter was one of the most powerful private investors on the planet, a man whose signature could move markets, whose silence could bankrupt corporations, whose wealth stretched far beyond public billionaire rankings because it was designed to remain hidden. Years ago, when Alia was still a child, Isaiah had discovered something explosive while working as a financial systems architect, evidence of coordinated corruption between political elites, global banks, and legacy families who built empires by crushing others quietly. When he refused to play along, he was offered a choice: disappear voluntarily or be erased permanently. He chose disappearance, staging his exit so convincingly that even his own family believed he had abandoned them. The pain of that decision had never faded. He had missed birthdays, graduations, late-night phone calls that never came. But he had built a financial fortress in the shadows, vowing that one day, when it was safe, he would return not as a broken man begging forgiveness, but as a shield powerful enough to protect the daughter he loved. Now, watching Alia's future being negotiated by people who saw her as disposable, something inside him hardened. He replayed the image of Margaret, Whitmore's satisfied smile after the prenup was signed, and for the first time in years, Isaiah felt anger sharpen into focus. The Whitmores were old money. Yes, but old money often forgot that new power didn't need permission.